Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy Podcast. We can't wait for today because we have a policy expert from Excel in Ed, and I'm just excited to talk about policy because I don't know that much about policy, so she is going to give us all the details.
Yeah, this is not our forte usually, but it's really exciting because we talk a lot about, the science of reading, and we've talked about it needs to get into ed schools and really pushing that. And now there's kind of a push for getting it into laws, like state law. And I can't wait to hear someone who knows what they're talking about with it and what it really means. What does it really mean when we're saying there's a law for science of reading? What does that really look like?
That's a good question. So let's hear from that someone special. Welcome to the podcast.
So much, ladies. I am so excited to be here. I've heard so much about this dynamic duo. So thank you for inviting me to join you today. Hi, everyone. I'm Kymyona Burk, and I am the Policy Director for Early Literacy at the Foundation for Excellence in Education. It's otherwise known as Excel in Ed. And we work across the country with states that are either considering passing policies related to our core components, the policies that we support, such as accountability, college and career pathways, and then, of course, my area, which is early literacy. So we support the legislators in doing that and making sure that the language that's in the bills are actually practical and things that can be implemented on the ground. But then also I have the joy of working with state literacy leaders who are implementing these policies. It's one thing to pass it, but then there's another thing to actually put it into practice. So I work very closely with state literacy leaders who are charged with leading the implementation of these laws. And so it's a very unique position. I'm excited to be a part of this work nationally.
Yeah, it's funny because every time you say, I know we've had a pre-call, so we've talked, but you're talking about the bills, and I picture the Schoolhouse Rock where there, how a bill becomes a law, which is totally ridiculous because that was a long, long time ago.
Probably still pretty similar.
Well, the Schoolhouse Rock was very long time ago. So I think it would be really interesting for our listeners to hear your background because I think it's very unique and special. Because when you were, talking in our pre-call, I kept thinking, was she a teacher? Was she a lawyer?
How do you get into this?
Yeah. So would you mind sharing a little bit about your background and how you got here?
Sure. I definitely didn't grow up saying I was going to be a policy director for early literacy for a foundation, but I wanted to be an attorney. So fun fact, my father was an educator. He was this chemistry geek, and he taught for all the years that all of the years that I knew him, of course. And so I just came through this channel in such a unique way. My undergraduate degree is in political science. So I love the politics of it all. I've always liked politics. But one of my aunt's friends suggested that I take a year off before law school and substitute teach. I said, hey, why not, right? Fresh out of college, I said, okay, let's do this. And my first day of substitute teaching, I was at an elementary school, and the principal walked by my class several times, and I was like, am I in trouble? This is just awful at this. And by the end of the day, she offered me a job. And the job was to be a reading teacher to first grade students, and they were implementing the Success for All literacy program there. And so that's how I began. And when I say I fell in love with just the students and how their eyes would just light up. Now, I did get pink eye 3 times in 1 year.
Of course.
Philly. But during that year, I became certified. I became certified to teach English. That had always kind of been a strong suit of mine as well. So certified to teach English. And I taught in middle school and high school. But the year that I was really challenged as an educator was the year where I was recruited to teach at the International Baccalaureate School to teach English to 9th graders. And principals changed. And so during the summer, and so when I came to get my class assignments, the new principal said, well, you're going to teach IB students, and then you're going to teach a class of repeaters. And I said, well, what does that mean? So she said, well, there's this class of students who failed 1 or 2 grades, and we want you to teach them as well. And so seeing those high school students struggle, the way that they were struggling, and, I began to ask, how did you get here? Or how many teachers failed you, honestly? And you're sitting in this classroom and you don't know how to read. And that began my work and my passion with literacy. So I went back, got a few degrees. My last one was in early childhood education, and started doing literacy and reading and those things. And lo and behold, Mississippi passes this Literacy-Based Promotion Act. And I was selected to lead that effort in 2013. And now here we are. So
Yeah.
Interesting indeed. Political science degree actually comes in handy these days.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about Mississippi on several podcasts. We've talked to people from Mississippi, Dr. Green, Kristen Wins. We've talked to a few people, but I'm really excited to hear from your side, what happened in Mississippi, because there's a lot of spotlight on that state.
Ladies, I'll say this. I really believe that it had to be Mississippi. It had to be Mississippi to have these gains, especially, in 2019 with NAEP, so that the rest of the country can say, if Mississippi can do it, let's find out what they're doing in Mississippi. So I really think that it had to be us. But, over the years, we have really invested in our teachers and invested in ensuring that we were building a common knowledge for what it meant to teach students how to read. And I always talk about it in three buckets, 3 components. So our law guides us in these things. What are we going to do for our teachers to build support for our teachers and build knowledge for our teachers and our administrators? Then what are we going to do to support our students? And then lastly, what are we doing to support our parents and families? And we took that model from our law, from the state agency, and said, okay, let's develop guidance for our districts. Let's train our teachers. Let's put our literacy coaches in schools to provide that on-site support. And then, of course, let's empower our parents and families. And I think with the way that our law was written, it specifically names the science of reading. And from there, we were able to procure the professional development, and that starts our structure. That's the baseline of it all. And I always say we invested in people, not programs, because when you invest in people, you empower them and give them the knowledge to be able to choose the right programs. In order to carry out effective literacy instruction in the classroom. So just over the years, when we began to see success, it was, and our first time of seeing the success was in 2015, which was really, really shortly after our law was passed in 2013.
Yeah.
When I say everyone began to rally around that, it happens everywhere. When you decide to lose weight or to exercise, and then you lose that first 2 pounds, you're just like, oh, I could do this every day, right? Just to do this. And so for us, we needed that. We needed that early win to show us that we could do it. And then we have just been doing it ever since.
So I'm curious. I'm assuming it was intentional naming the science of reading in that policy. That was an intentional move.
Yeah. So I can't take the credit because I wasn't hired yet. But the State Department of Education, our Mississippi Department of Ed, actually worked with Excel in Ed. So it's all full circle for me. This is an amazing space to be in. But MDE worked with Excel in Ed because Florida passed a similar law in 2002. And so our then Governor, Phil Bryant, worked with Excel in Ed to craft our law after Florida's law that has been successful. So the language was intentional and it was included. And it just really gave us a blueprint. And I always say that it's not one of these 50-page bills. It's not, one of these laws that goes on and on and on. It really gets to the point of what is to be done to improve literacy outcomes in Mississippi. And we really did have our I guess I'll say our powerful three, which includes our support from the governor, the support from and just great leadership from our state superintendent, and then of course support from our legislators to really make this thing work.
Yeah. Melissa and I always pause because we can read each other so well that like we know that the other wants to ask a question. Do you want to ask a question, Melissa?
Go for it, Lori.
I'm curious what that success looked like in 2015. That was a quick win that then helped you jump forward.
Okay, so there were a few things taking place at the same time. When this law was passed, we had recently adopted our college and career readiness standards. So our teachers had begun training in those standards, which were so much more rigorous than we called it our Mississippi curriculum test. And we were on our second version of it with the objectives, and we were still last in the country, right? So we decided to do something differently. That was during the same time, everybody was adopting Common Core. And I know I shouldn't say that in this day and time, but we adopted those standards, modified them to become our Mississippi College and Career Readiness Standards, and begin that implementation. So we now have more rigorous standards. We also adopted an assessment that was aligned to those standards. And then we said, we're going to focus on literacy. So we had these three things going on at the same time. But one thing that we were doing that was a bit different than what had been done before, especially in the era of Reading First and those different initiatives where money was just being spent and
right.
Facilitation of those things. We actually had, and Dr. Wright would say, a state-led approach. And from the state agency, we hired the literacy coaches who would be going into the schools to support teachers. We determined where they would go, where they would be deployed based on student data, based on these schools being a part of our lowest performing schools list. We guided districts. Yes, and we're local control. You sometimes hear states make this, well, we're local control. Yeah, we're local control, but we give you what we call guided decision making. You can make your decision, but from this list of decisions. So these are the best practices. And so, yes, you can do anything you want from this list.
I like that. It's kind of like what we do with like a child, right?
Yeah.
Sure, you can have fruit for a snack. You can choose one.
Exactly. Your choice. So, we began to just really take the lead. And I think that, after the first year, we had schools saying, we don't want the State Department in our building because you're really just known as an agency, right? You're known as this, the state takeover place or the auditing place. But I really believe putting literacy coaches in those buildings as an extension of our state agency really helped schools and district leaders to look at us differently, not just as this agency that's going to come down with their clipboards, but as this agency that is going to support us on the ground. So it was so important that we not only passed this law, the law was also funded, $9.5 million the first year, $15 million each year thereafter. But we also put supports in the schools. We said, so we're going to help you get there. Not just, we need to make sure students are ready to read by the end of third grade, but we're going to help you get there. And putting those coaches in the schools, showing them that we were there, literally on the ground with them to support them along the way, went a long way. And it kind of shifted the perception of the agency. So we started getting a lot of superintendents calling, wanted to come to our trainings, wanted to be a part of our, committees and task forces and all of those things. And I believe that has been key to building those relationships for us all to collectively work together. So it happened pretty quickly when we saw that 5 scale score point jump from 2013 to 2015. We went from a scale score of 209 in fourth grade reading to 214. Big press conference and all of that, but you have to know, once you do that, the pressure is on.
Yeah.
The pressure is on to continue to do that. So every other year I was sitting like, Lord, I'm waiting on these NAEP scores, please. Continue to move in the right direction. So, and we've been able to do that.
So, Kymyona, I think that the third grade retention is what gets a lot of attention, right? Especially when it's a law and can maybe get some people fired up a little of what you're going to hold students back. But what I'm hearing you say is, it wasn't just that. It wasn't just let's put a law in place and everything stays the same. And now we just start holding teachers to a higher standard, and students to a higher standard, but that there was a lot that was put into place to support it. Is that?
Yeah. And I'm kind of writing about it right now. We focus a lot on the end of the third grade, but at the end of the day, a comprehensive policy, a good policy, those policies that at ExcelinEd, we really guide our legislators into to drafting and passing. They include all of these supports that happen before the end of third grade. And I think that just hasn't gotten enough attention. What are the things that are being done to prevent reading failure or to prevent retention at the end of third grade? And guess what? A whole lot happens in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade before end of year testing even occurs. And I think that that's the picture that we really need to paint and just highlight, especially for other stakeholders who aren't in education or don't do policy and they don't necessarily know. All they hear is if students don't pass an assessment, they'll be retained at the end of third grade. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about those things that I mentioned, ensuring that teachers are trained, ensuring that students are, have those assessments so teachers can make those instructional decisions beginning as early as kindergarten, then all of these supports along the way, making sure that parents are notified, making sure parents know how they can help teachers in ensuring that their children are successful. All of these things happen before an end of the year third grade assessment. And with most states that have retention, I believe all states that have a retention piece, they have what's called good cause exemptions. So these are things that parents must be aware about and aware of. And those are some of the things in our first couple of years with our Literacy Act in Mississippi, where we did parent meetings across the state. Because you have to let parents know, well, hey, if your child has an IEP or 504, he or she may qualify for a good cause exemption. And what is that? A good cause exemption is if your child fails the assessment and this child has had years of intensive intervention and they still didn't pass, but they meet these particular criteria, and IEP 504 is just one of them, then your child may qualify. But these are things you need to know ahead of time so that you can be empowered to assist teachers in making these decisions about your child. So I think that all of these things should be highlighted and then say for those students who still do not meet the criteria for passing to fourth grade, then they will be retained in third grade, but the goal is for them to get a completely different experience. You see things in laws where it says that, students must have a highly qualified or higher performing teacher if they are retained. That students continue to receive intensive supports if they are retained. That the progress monitoring still takes place. The data is still collected and instructional decisions are being modified to meet those needs. So all of these things should take place in that year for any student who has not met the criteria for promotion.
Yeah. As you were chatting, or as you were sharing, I jotted down that collaborative approach that you're speaking about, it just feels so empowering, as I imagine that parents in the state feel as though they can truly advocate for their child. I know sometimes it does feel like if you're a parent who doesn't know about literacy, it does feel like the teacher or the school is telling you all about it. Exactly. And you don't necessarily have a say. But, really nobody knows their child best than the parent. And,
especially since the pandemic started.
Yes. Absolutely. I agree. I feel like we know more about our kids than we probably ever wanted to. Look how they learn best, etc. But, you're really empowering families and not just parents. I want to make sure I'm using language appropriately, families to empower them with knowledge so that they're truly able to collaboratively work with the school system to advocate for their child and to really know what the the laws say, at least in a way that they can access the information and that empowers them to do the work of a parent, you know?
Right. You know, you hear these stories about parents saying, well, I didn't know until the end of the school year that my child was not going to pass. That actually happens in many cases, you know. So with this law, it says that parents must be notified after the first 30 days when students are screened. Parents are notified if their child has or exhibits, characteristics of dyslexia or has a reading deficiency. Parents must be notified early and often. It shouldn't be a surprise at the end of the year. You shouldn't have parents saying, well, I wish I would have known, I would have been able to get tutoring, or I would have been able to, help my child more, or, we have an older sibling that could. You don't want those types of situations. And parents are our child's first teacher. It's cliche, but it is.
True.
It is what it is. And so we do want to make sure that we have students for a certain time during the day, and the parents have them from the evening, and they have all of these intimate moments with students and children where they can talk to them about what they learned today, or they can ask them these questions about, well, when we saw this TV show, what did you think about it? Comprehension strategies, all of these things that parents can also do that's not in a formal setting, but can assist their children in understanding even oral language communication, all of those things where parents and families really play an important role. And we have to leverage that. We can't do it ourselves. We have to leverage that.
It reminds me of Emily Hanford's, one of her latest podcasts, where she talks to a parent who finds out that her student in middle school is reading at like a second grade level. And she's like, why am I just finding this out now?
Yes. That's real life, girls. That's real.
I know.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to your prioritization of the investment in people and, the investment in, obviously you're investing in families and parents, but you're also investing in teachers and building that knowledge for them. And so I'm wondering, what knowledge did you build for teachers in the trainings that, I know that I'm sure you didn't just put these literacy coaches in school and you were like, have at it.
Right. Yeah. So it was important for us. And Melissa, you mentioned early on about the role of teacher prep. So we had to take accountability for the fact that we knew that our teachers were coming from different teacher prep programs. We have about 15 public and private universities here in Mississippi. And then, of course, especially even those teachers who come from out of state. So to establish a baseline of this is what it means to teach students effectively, grounded in the science of reading, not just phonics. Because there are some other components too that seem to be left out in some conversations. But we had to take ownership of ensuring that our teachers had that knowledge. And I always say, I've said it to my students, I've said it to my staff, I can't hold someone accountable unless I know for sure that I've taught it, right? I can't hold you accountable on a test for knowing figurative language if I haven't taught it to you. So for us in Mississippi, we have to be sure that when we lay our heads down to sleep at night, we know that we've taught you these things. Now the expectation is that we see these things in practice, right? So for us, it was teaching teachers how to assess students. You get these reports that say, hey, well, these students have these particular deficiencies. You can group them together and you can provide small group instruction to these students. Okay, but what does that look like, right? So in the training that they had, and it's no secret, we chose letters here in Mississippi through Voyager Sopris, that we went with the model where only letters, Voyager Sopris trainers trained our teachers. That's just how we decided to go, right? That's the route we decided to go. Because we did not want, across the state where there is a trainer in South Mississippi that says some things about the number of phonemes in a word, and the trainer in North Mississippi says some things, and there's a different number and all of that. We want to ensure that our teachers had access to trainers who had been deeply involved in this work, and that we could have consistent language across the state. If we would not have done that to build their knowledge, our coaches would have been starting at zero every day, because now they've gone to this training and our coaches can come in and say, we know you've had letters. So let's talk about what that looks like with your students. Let's transfer that into actual practice with your kids, and then to guide them and give them the support along the way. So it was extremely important for us to first build that knowledge. And yes, our coaches, the initial number was supposed to be 75 for the first year, and they hired 22 plus me and my assistant director at the time.
Oh my.
And so, I have the headlines from the newspaper articles. You mean to tell us that you couldn't find 75 people? And guess what? In 2013, we couldn't.
Yeah.
But in 2015 or 2016, I believe, we had up to 80. So we were able to do that because we built their knowledge. So when they came to interviews to become literacy coaches, we were like, oh yeah, you've had letters. Oh yeah, you've had a coach in your building because you know how to build relationships. So these were things that we had to put into place, and that we had to say, we want to go with quality over quantity, the cliche, but for real, because it really doesn't matter what you know. If you've had success in your classroom, but you have to know how to play well with other adults. You really have to know how to have those conversations, and for adults to trust you, for them to even consider your suggestions as to how they should change their practice in their own classroom. So all of those things went together.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense that everyone's speaking the same language, right? Because often it's we just do a PD over here, we do a PD over there. But I mean, you guys picked letters. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, but that's a great example of everyone's doing this. The coach is doing letters, the teacher's doing letters. I'm assuming school leaders.
Oh yeah. School leaders were doing letters, and it was amazing to go on. We have this process called a learning walk, and we'll do a learning walk in the fall, a learning walk in the spring. And so a learning walk is just when you have a team that includes the literacy coach, even their regional coordinator or a state director, and then the principal and their APs or a lead teacher, and even people from the district office, where we actually walk. We'll go to the classrooms and maybe stand in the classroom about 10 to 15 minutes. We have an instrument that we use to just kind of jot down what we see. And then our debriefing is where we say, okay, these are our commendations. These are the things that we see that are going well. These are our recommendations. So this is where we level set to say, okay, this is where the coach is going to help you with this recommendation. This is where the principal has to take the lead. This is where your district personnel has to take the lead. And that's our plan. This is our baseline data. And then in the fall, for baseline data for coaching support and for just supporting their teachers. And then in the spring, we come back and do another learning walk. And we say, oh, great, you did these things. These are great. Yes. And we still need to, assist you in changing these things, because to change a culture, you have to change a culture, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's that thought, it's that shift in mindset from it's hard to break up with the old ways. If that's what you were taught in college, if that's what you've been exposed to, it's hard. But when you see the new ways working, which really aren't that new, but that's a whole nother conversation, it does build, it builds your confidence and it builds your buy-in.
Yeah. And when the administrator knows what he or she should be looking for,
yes,
sets the entire tone. And it's not because of their program or these things. It's because, hey, I was an 11th grade English teacher. I had my master's in ed administration and a position open at the elementary school to be an administrator. And I got it. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to be this principal. But what happens is in those K2 areas, they don't necessarily go into those areas because, you see kids talking, or you see them sitting on mats, crisscross applesauce. You see all of those things. You say, oh, wow, it's going so well in there. But if you're sitting in a classroom and you don't necessarily know, well, this is the phonics routine, or, hey, you skipped a couple of steps, then it becomes challenging for the principal to be able to provide that feedback. And I always say to administrators, you have to be an evaluator and a coach. You be that school leader, but you also have to coach teachers up to ensure that first, you're able to retain these teachers, right? That your turnover is not high every year, that you're able to retain these teachers and that you're able to make them the best teachers that they can be under your leadership.
Yeah. And just, I'm going to circle back to the letters training one more time. So I'm halfway through my letters training.
Nice.
I don't know how you all did it, but we're doing it in a 2-year. It's 2 years. So I finished my first year. But I mean, it's a deep training. So I think oftentimes, we hear like, oh, a principal went to a training, and it's like they went to a 1 day, they learned about a program, and now they're going through with their checklist to see what they see in classrooms. But I mean, letters training is deep. And like, I mean, I was trained to be a reading specialist, but I still say letters has trained me better.
Yes.
It really is to know that principals, coaches, teachers are getting that deep level of training and can speak to the complexities of how to teach the English language to students is amazing.
So a moment of transparency. When we initially adopted letters for our teachers, we actually adopted principal's primer for our administrators. So we did have a separate training for our administrators. Now that
I can't imagine it was 1 day though.
No, but you know what? It was, I believe it was 2 days, Melissa.
Oh, was it?
So we got you by one. It was in that training. Okay. It was so that administrators can serve as literacy leaders. It was ensure that your scheduling allows for an uninterrupted 90-minute reading block, or how do you ensure that your, RTI, then MTSS now, that system is being done correctly, who needs to be at the table and those things. But it really did not go deeply into what it looks like to ensure that vocabulary is being taught, or what it looks like when students are working with syllables, the initial sounds, the medial sounds, and word families. It didn't have any of those things there. But, we realized after about 1.5 years, we had some administrators saying, okay, but I still don't know what's happening in the classroom. I got this, right? You can come all day and see the structure, but I still don't know what's happening. So really after the first couple of years, we did away with principal's primer, and we then required all of our administrators to go through letters just like the teachers. Because I remember during the first couple of years, we did a learning walk into school, and the principal was walking around with me. And by the time we got to the fourth classroom, that principal said, oh, wait, I know what this is.
That's so good.
This is now, now that I've seen it 3 other times, I know what this is. But I mean, it's really making sure that the principals know what they're looking for so they can hold teachers accountable for making sure that these things are done effectively in the classroom.
And again, acknowledging that shift too. Like this is, this is not, I don't even know what to call it, like old school leadership, rather than supportive, like elbow partner leadership. Like when you think about it, old school leadership was like, I'm going to walk in with a checklist, check. Oh, we're teaching phonics. Oh, we're teaching this book. And I know that's in the curriculum. So I'm check. And now I'm out to the next room, right? It was very like scannable, if you will. Whereas what's the shift? And obviously we do this podcast and we are obsessed with everything that you're saying. So we totally believe that this is the right way to go. It's so much deep knowledge, but it's a lot for administrators. We have to acknowledge that too. Like they have to become like almost literacy experts, and they have to become probably also almost math experts. Like they have to know so much about, 2 very big buckets that I assume it could be overwhelming at times, but I think with supports like yours, that you're putting in place and saying like, hey, we're all learning together. You're not expected to be a master in this tomorrow. Like,
Right. Some of our coaches, we always talk about coaches going into coach teachers, but in many cases it became the relationship where the coaches were also coaching the administrators. And we also created this amazing resource called Literacy Focus of the Month. So I would always have my coaches to do summer projects. And so for one summer, our project was to do this Literacy Focus of the Month manual. I had done it on a smaller scale when I was a literacy coach, but I'm like, I wanted to go broad and big and for the whole state. So for each month, there's a literacy focus. And in this manual, there's one for elementary and secondary. There are all of these strategies that represent what can be done to focus on phonological awareness, or to focus on morphology, or to focus on these things. And so one of my coaches had this amazing idea and said, well, let's show them what this looks like in practice. So then we started Literacy Focus of the Month in Action, where we our media person at the MDE learned so much about literacy because our coaches literally went across the state, went into classrooms and modeled these strategies with students. And so these videos, they're on YouTube under MDE_literacy. And you get to see all of these videos where the first part is a brief, probably 10-minute PowerPoint that gives the research behind it. And then it moves into the coach actually teaching the lesson in class and students responding and all of these things. So you get to see them based on specific components of literacy. And I remember getting an email from a principal at 12 o'clock, like at midnight. Thank you. I just watched some videos and now I see what I'm supposed to be looking for. So that, yes, that is extremely important for them to have access to different modes of learning like we do with our students, right? So not just here's the research, but also, videos to see this is what it looks like. And then this is what it looks like again. I'm really big on that. I don't know about you guys, but honestly, coming up and teaching, when I saw all of these videos of these video kids, the teacher's asking questions and all the students are raising their hands like, I have the answer to that. And you're like, that's not my class,
to be and you're like, I ask a hard question and I get like maybe one, the same kid.
Yes, the same kid all the time. And so, to have these videos that everyone has access to, in case they don't want to say, well, I don't know what that looks like. They can actually go to this video to say, well, I see this coach teaching this class about morphology and how to break that down and how they get to these things. I think it's also an added resource. We are resource queens here, and we have 2 male coaches, so I'll say kings, where we love developing things for access and for guidance for our educators.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you guys did amazing work in Mississippi, but I also don't want to run out of time. I want to talk about what you're doing now. So if you want to talk a little bit about how you got to your current role and what do you do?
Yeah, so in my current role, I work directly with 18 states that have passed, whether it's a comprehensive policy that includes all of these components of universal screening and training and teacher prep and even retention, or states that have passed other components of the policy related to possibly universal screening or teacher PD or those things. And we work together as a professional learning community where we meet quarterly to highlight states that are doing these innovative things around early literacy, and other states are able to learn from those states. And then we'll also have work sessions or collaborative group sessions where we're developing documents and guidance for the country. So it's really a great opportunity to work with so many people in these leadership roles and to see it differently. I mentioned earlier, for professional development, this is just one way that Mississippi has done it, but other places are doing it different ways. And it's fine, and it still works for them and for their state. So, our goal, one of our products is going to be to create this comprehensive how-to guide for state leaders and also for legislators to see, well, if your climate is not ready for the retention component, the promotion piece based on an assessment or portfolio or these things, these are still some ways in which you can ensure that those students who may be identified as having reading challenges going into 4th grade can either attend a summer camp, they can do summer bridge programs, they can do those things. So just to give other options. And then on the other side, we have our advocacy C4 side of Excel in Ed, which includes our legislative directors who lobby, who work closely with legislators. And then once they hear that they're interested in early literacy, then I get the call, talk to those legislators more about what needs to be included in the bill. Or when I see language, I say, hey, well, that's not doable, really. Let's change that language to say this. And I've had the unique opportunity of testifying in committee, serving as an expert to give expert testimony in Alaska and in Florida and well, not in those places via Zoom, of course, but it's just such a unique experience to know that, when you think about legislators and you see, sometimes you'll pass C-SPAN or these other channels where you just kind of see them all sitting there, but they're really doing some really good work. They're doing the homework, behind what should be in these bills and ultimately these laws. And they're really seeking partnerships and support. We have Decoding Dyslexia that has been, of course, a great force in ensuring that literacy laws and even, of course, laws that include students with dyslexia and supports for those students are being passed. We have the Reading League, of which I am a board member, so I wanted to shout them out.
Yay. We interviewed them.
Yes, that has done some groundbreaking work across the country. And now we have so many chapters in our state. So that helps to find, it really does help to have a coalition of not just the big three that I mentioned earlier in the podcast, but other stakeholders within that specific state that are all, wanting to meet the same goal.
I'm wondering about, you said 18 states?
Yes.
Is that right? It feels like on one hand, all right, we're making some progress, but that's a whole lot of states that are not doing this work. I don't know. Where do you land on that?
I'll say this. There has been, I always have to pause so I can make sure it's a politically correct thing. But I'll say this, there are states that are higher performing states, whether it's based on NAEP, whether it's based on their state test scores, they're higher performing states. And so I'll say this about the equity piece. So I have to say this, of course, if I'm going to be on your podcast. So I'll say
absolutely.
Piece. There are states that can mask the data of their subgroups because the data of their white students shows that overall the state may be doing well, or overall a district may be doing well. But we have to begin to dig into, what supports are being provided to ensure that all students are being successful, not just the majority white students, but what are we doing to ensure that our Black and Brown students are also being successful? So there are some states that, although we see them as higher performing states, know that there's an organization, a legislator, or someone who has reached out to Excel and Ed to say, we really need to do something about this, and we may need to pass a law to make sure it's done. And so, we do ask the question, why does it even have to be a law, right? Why does it have to be a law to say we have to teach students how to read? We do know that there's been a lawsuit in California, there's been a lawsuit in Detroit where students have won that said, I have a right to read and you are supposed to teach me, how to do that. So there are states with that just are not a part of our network, possibly, that are looking to develop bills or looking to strengthen some of the things that they may already have on the books. And that's one of the things that happened in North Carolina. If you even Google some of the things that have occurred with Read to Achieve over the years, you see now why they've made this such a bold move to say, we're going to revamp that, because that wasn't meeting the needs of our kids. We had the idea, but we really didn't implement it the way that we should have to meet the needs of all students. And so that was the purpose of them passing this new law just recently.
Yeah. We think a lot about unintended consequences. Yes. And I think there's that unintended consequence of, you can think through something to the nth degree, and there's still in practice going to be some unintended consequences that happen, because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a law ensures that not just our higher performing districts, but all of our districts have access to teachers who have the knowledge, right? Not just those districts who can afford to send teachers to training. It also ensures that, all of our students are receiving the intensive interventions that they need, not just in those districts or schools that can afford an interventionist, right? So you think about what a law actually does. A lot of people don't like to, they say, I don't want to legislate everything, right? But this is important enough to legislate. This is important enough to say, if we don't put this in writing and if we don't make this a mandate, then it is likely not to occur for too many students. One is too many, right? So it's likely to occur and happen for those students. So that's why I'm such a proponent and just really passionate and just, again, blessed to be in this space to be able to affect change across the country.
Yeah. That's a really good point, because I was thinking earlier, like, what's the difference between putting it into a law and just having the State Department say to do something, right?
Yeah. Right.
But what you just said is it, right? It's just, this is important enough. Like we need it.
Obviously it's important enough, right? Because we've gotten to this place where so many children are not reading. And I'm children all the way through high school, like adults who have been through our system. There's a systemic issue that is going on, and there needs to be a major shift. And this is, I think, just one way for it to happen. Like, it's just one part. This is just one piece of the puzzle, right? That then influences that change.
Yeah.
Right. Because the rubber meets the road in those classrooms. We pass these laws, and, I think for us, having coaches in the buildings helped us with ensuring that implementation was happening, because even as a State Department, we can give out all the guidance in the world, but is there anyone, the inspect what you expect rule, is there anyone really on the ground inspecting this, making sure that our expectations for small group instruction, our expectation for the 90-minute reading block not being interrupted by the announcements for the school day, all of these other things, is there anyone there that actually makes sure that these things are happening? And for us, our coaches, although they weren't in there to say, hey, you don't have this 90-minute reading block, so I'm going to make sure that the State Department knows. They were there to say, hey, your schedule hasn't allowed for a 90-minute reading block, so let's sit down and look at your schedule in ways in which we can make sure that happens. So that's just a completely different approach to having those eyes and boots on the ground to support implementation, because implementation is key.
I think what strikes me is that you took this model and then you blew it up large scale, but it's from my interpretation, and feel free to add or correct me, it's both top down with the policy, and then bottom up with the coaches and the professional learning and all of this knowledge that you're building, as well as having the humans, the coaches who are there to support. So you're having the support as well as this, it says we must do this, so we're going to support you in doing this, and let's work together.
Yes, perfectly said. Yep, that's how it worked for us. And, in these cases, because we were able to protect our coaches' time. So if you talk to anyone about coaching, that the time, protecting the time is the most important thing.
Oh, yeah.
So I would start the year off with my coaches saying, if a principal offers you a walkie-talkie, don't take it, right? Because then you're bus duty.
Lunch duty. Bus duty.
Or if a principal comes, and we have meetings with our superintendents every year at the beginning of the year. Hey, you're getting a coach. This is what the coach can do. This is what they can't do. You can't say, hey, I have a teacher who's running late, so can you go and watch their class for a little while? You can't, because the coach ends up being in there all day because the sub is now not coming. Oh, by 11 o'clock, well, the sub's not going to come. So you can't stay there until, so all of these things that we made very clear. And we were able to do that because there were coaches coming from the state agency to say, these are the other things that, like, their job is to coach and support, you and your teachers, and these other things will get in the way of them doing that. So I think that was also extremely important.
That's awesome.
Great.
Well, I will link your information in the show notes. Is there a place where are you on social media outlets? You want to pump yourself up right now? Take a minute and let everybody know where they can find you.
You know what? You just put me me on the spot because I have no idea what my Twitter, I think it's Kymyona Burk or something. It might just be my name. But
I'll try to find you.
Yeah, if you search Kymyona, I mean, there's really one, right? So if you search that, spelled the way that my name is spelled, then you'll definitely find me on Twitter. So
okay. Well, you know what? I'll put your name in the title of the podcast so that everybody, good. So they can listen to this part and be like, oh yeah, Twitter. Okay, done.
Yeah.
So sounds we always,
I found it.
Oh, you found it. Go ahead.
See, I told you.
Kymyona_Burk.
That's what it is.
Easy and simple. Perfect. Well, so good. So everybody can find you on Twitter. I will link Excel and Ed because of the good work that you're doing. Yes. And thank you for doing this work. But we always ask our guests at the end of the podcast to leave a piece of advice for our listeners. And we're hopeful that you'll give our listeners a piece of advice to really consider. I think you've given them so much to think about, but anything you'd like them to either leave them with or ruminate on, up to you.
All right. So I will say this. As a parent, it's just extremely important to be engaged, however that looks like for you, and to be empowered and to know that you are a partner with your child's teachers and with your child's school. And there is no question that you can ask that should not be answered, because I'm very, very, I'm a proponent of parents being empowered. As an educator, I want to say that, to our teachers, you all have done just amazing work and are to be celebrated. Never stop learning. Never stop. I've had my ex-mother-in-law was an English teacher, and she taught for 43 years before she retired.
Oh, wow.
She's still very active, but she taught for 43 years before she retired. But when I started doing professional development at the state agency, she would come to my trainings at high school. But she would come to my trainings because she just always wanted to learn more. So just never stop learning. These opportunities, these resources, what this space has provided for us with now things on Zoom and access and all, just take advantage of those things. And that's for everyone who's in this fight, pre-pandemic, during pandemic, to post-pandemic, that we will get through this. There are things that were highlighted, like the access or lack thereof to broadband. All of these things were necessary so that we can now ensure that our students, all students, have what they need to work at home. For teachers to be able to do things at home. Teachers were, driving to a McDonald's to get a hotspot. So now, because these things have been brought to light, I just think that they're going to propel us into, just the next phase of what we are to do to just make education what it needs to be again in the country. So I just appreciate the work of everyone else in our children are successful and that we improve their quality of life. And I'll say this last thing that I would say to my staff when we started every year. We are partly responsible for who these children turn out to be. No pressure.
No pressure. I love that.
That's great.
I was wondering who you were giving your advice to, because you're at like every layer of education. So I'm glad you gave it to each part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've inspired me just talking with you.
Yeah, seriously.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We can't wait for everybody to hear this. You're just, I just keep thinking your voice is like so poised and beautiful. Like the way that you're articulating everything just makes it so easy to understand. So thank you for that.
I learned so much from you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And let me know how your letters journey.
I will.
Thank you so much, Kymyona. Have a great day.
You guys too. Bye.
Bye.